What is going on, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the JW Football Show. Unfortunately for me today, I'm talking about my arch nemesis, the Green Bay Packers, and their 2026 offseason. Let's get right into it. So, I think if you ask a lot of Packers fans, I think their hopes were a little bit higher this year. I think especially during the regular season, prior to that Micah Parsons injury, I think there were Super Bowl aspirations for this team, and unfortunately, it just didn't go that way. Obviously, they lose to my Chicago Bears in the playoffs. Micah Parsons tears his ACL. Tucker Kraft gets hurt. Just kind of the injury bug to this year. I do still think the Packers are well within their Super Bowl window. So as much as it might pain me, I'm going to do all I can to try to make my bitter rival, as close to a Super Bowl champion caliber roster as I can. So, starting with the cap space, right? Right now, they're technically negative $3.5 million as far as cap space goes. Like I said in the last episode, that's very easy to manage. You look at guys like Xavier McKinney, Zach Tom, Jordan Love, Aaron Banks, Josh Jacobs, all guys whose contracts can be restructured. Even just that would free up, $32 million worth of cap space for this year. And I think pretty much all of those guys are guys you'd like to keep around, maybe with the exception of Aaron Banks and Josh Jacobs. I know there's been, a little bit of talk around, is Josh Jacobs a part of this team next year? I think it'd be crazy if he wasn't. I think when the Packers offense is at their best, it's when Josh Jacobs is rolling. Obviously, he was beat up a little bit this year, didn't produce the way he did the year prior. I think, with a fully healthy Josh Jacobs, he'll be just fine. Aaron Banks is a guy that the Packers gave a lot of money to last year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Packers fans can correct me on this. I thought Aaron Banks was far less stellar than I was hoping for. Even as a part of the 49ers prior to this year, I never thought he was that good, at least considering the contract he got from Green Bay. So we'll see, maybe in year 2 of the system, he can take another step forward. But I do think, you restructure his contract a little bit, free up some space for this year, keep that Super Bowl window open. Let's take a look at some of the Packers' possible free agents and even a trade that I think could go down. So really quick, just before we get into possible re-signings and a possible trade, let's really quickly talk about some possible roster cuts. Elton Jenkins is one. I know he's been a Packer for quite a while now, and he's been a good Packer for quite a while now. I don't know, and again, I would love to hear, especially on an episode like this, from Packers fans. What do you guys think, right? Are you guys agreeing with what I'm saying? Am I getting some stuff wrong? Am I misvaluing players? Please let me know, right? I'd love to have some conversations about this. There's a lot of Packers fans that probably know more about their team than I do. But from my angle, I don't know if Elton Jenkins is worth the $15 million he's going to be owed if he's on the roster. I think by, cutting him, you save $15 million. I think you at least feel okay about your offensive line. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But I think saving $15 million gives you the flexibility you need to continue building a championship roster. And then Keyshawn Nixon, man, I think some people are going to say this is bias out of me. If you know anything about, me and my football fandom, I am, let's just say, not a huge fan of Keyshawn Nixon, excuse me. Not only do I think he's a subpar player, I think he's kind of, a nuisance, as that's kind of the best way to put it. I think he does more harm than good. I think he's kind of dirty. He took a cheap shot at my guy DJ Moore in one of our matchups this year. A lot of personal fouls, just stuff like that, right? I think a lot of Packers fans would hopefully agree with me that he's a very frustrating player to cheer for at times. And you factor that in with the fact that you save $3 million by cutting him this year. To me, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think he's good enough to warrant the stuff that comes along with him, or good enough to warrant, not saving the $3 million you save when getting rid of him. So after cutting those two guys, you're up to, about $46 million in cap space, which is more than enough, considering what I want to do with the Green Bay Packers in this kind of mock offseason. Now let's get into a possible trade and some possible re-signings. So the trade I've been referring to is getting Rashawn Gary out of town. Again, this is another spot where I really want to hear from Packers fans. I thought Rashawn Gary, I just think he's been underwhelming, man. I know he was drafted highly and he's gotten paid a good amount of money. I thought, not only after Micah Parsons gets hurt, does he not really step up and take over that, kind of edge one role? But even when Micah Parsons was healthy, man, I think myself and a lot of, Packers fans were hoping that, Rashawn Gary as the kind of edge two would be able to wreak havoc and he's not getting doubled and Micah's causing so much, attention towards him that, Rashawn Gary gets kind of let loose. And that just didn't happen, man. He just wasn't very productive. I don't know if he's really worth the money. And I think if you could trade him to a team like the Raiders, who, again, I know in my last episode I had DJ Moore, going to the Raiders in return for Max Crosby. So this is another trade with Las Vegas. But they're just are going to have so much roster turnover, and they have a lot of draft capital. I think and I think this is even rich for Rashawn Gary. Again, let me know. I have Rashawn Gary going to the Raiders in exchange for a 2026 4th-round pick, so a 4th-round pick this year, and then a 2027 6th-round pick. And this trade would have to happen post-June 1st in order for the Packers to, free up the necessary cap space that I think really makes this trade worth it. Again, after making this trade, not only are you acquiring 2 potentially valuable day 3 selections, but you're also saving over $11 million in cap by getting rid of a guy that I just don't think is worth it. And again, I'd love to hear from Packers fans. Am I way off on this? I just don't think he's worth that much money. And I think you'd rather give some of your younger guys like Lucas Van Ness, a bigger shot at, what can they do? And you'll see in just a moment, it's not just going to be Lucas Van Ness. We're going to bring in some reinforcements. So as far as internal free agency goes from Green Bay, there are some very impactful players that are up for new deals. You start with a guy like Rasheed Walker, who played left tackle this year for Green Bay. He was definitely okay. I don't know if he was stellar. You got Romeo Doubs, one of those, kind of key contributors in a relatively crowded wide receiver room. I think he could be in line to get a massive payday. Malik Willis, who I think he's all but gone. I think he played himself into a starting role elsewhere. Obviously, he's not taking Jordan Love's spot, but I think, maybe a guy like Jeff Hafley, who, just left Green Bay to be the head coach of Miami, maybe he goes there. Maybe he joins Mike McCarthy in Pittsburgh. I think he's going to have a lot of possible starting options. So I just don't think the Packers are going to be able to match what he's going to get as a starter elsewhere. Quay Walker's an interesting one. Kind of that linebacker too, next to Edgerrin Cooper. He's a free agent. Trayvon Diggs, a guy who's a super, super late season addition. He didn't really play much. Obviously, he didn't really get a chance to. Sean Ryan, a guy who's a mauler in the run game as an interior offensive line player. He could be in line for a payday. I think he has a ways to go as far as pass protection is concerned, but he's definitely a solid player. Kingsley Enagbare, who, as a Bears fan, I actually really like Kingsley Enagbare. I think a lot of times when I'm just watching TV, right? You turn on the game, I see him make a lot of, impactful plays in big moments, especially as a run defender. I know he made a play against the Bears in the first matchup, where he stops a run play on 3rd and short. We end up going for it on 4th down and don't get it, right? We throw an interception. So like that was something that stood out to me. I think he's an interesting player. John Fitzpatrick, that kind of 3rd tight end in that super injured tight end room, including him, right? He's up for a deal. Brenton Cox Jr., kind of that rotational, defensive front player. He's a restricted free agent. And then Bo Melton, who has played, receiver corner. He's that early rights free agent. So again, there's a couple guys here that, have played huge roles for Green Bay, not only last year, but, in the past 2 to 3 years. So let's talk about, who might come back, who might the Green Bay Packers let walk. So there's 3 guys I think the Packers could, be interested in bringing back. I think Sean Ryan is one of them. Again, I know I'm not sure as much about, Sean Ryan and how Packers fans feel about him. I think he's solid enough to, keep him around on a relatively manageable 3-year deal. I have it as, 3 years, $18 million. You're looking at 6 per year with 2 guaranteed. So it'd be like a 3-year deal, $18 million with $12 million guaranteed or something along those lines. I think just trying to keep a little bit of stability and continuity in that interior offensive line makes sense. I think Trayvon Diggs, I know he's like cut, right? But I think, possibly bringing him back on just a cheap 1-year deal, it can't hurt, right? It wasn't too long ago that he was, a lot of people considered an elite corner. I know he gives up a lot, but he has shown the ability to be a turnover machine. Do you want him as like your true CB1? No, right? Not at this point in his career. But I think if you bring him back on a 1-year manageable deal, to me, it's kind of like, what's the harm in it, right? You have the cap space. He has been a good player. Can he be productive for you on a big discount? I think it's worth a shot. And then Brenton Cox Jr., that guy I talked about earlier as that restricted free agent. I think bringing him back on like a 1 year, $1 to $2 million deal makes sense. He played a pretty significant amount this year. Keeping him in that front seven, I think makes sense. Obviously, this means you have some pretty significant free agents walking. And I think a big reason for that is that they're just going to get overpaid, right? And this might, maybe Packers fans feel differently. I don't think Rasheed Walker is good enough to pay over $20 million a year. I think you just drafted Jordan Morgan in the first round, and maybe he's better as a guard, but I think you have to at least try him at left tackle. A guy like Romeo Doubs, who made some huge plays for you guys, not only this year, but in years prior. I just think he's going to get paid too much money, right? You have Christian Watson, who, when healthy, is amazing. You just drafted Matthew Golden in the first round. I think Jaden Reed is one of Jordan Love's favorite targets. I don't know if it's worth paying Romeo Doubs, what could be, $20 million a year to maybe be your wide receiver 3, right? I just don't think it makes sense for where the Packers are at. So he unfortunately walks. I'm not a huge Quay Walker fan, so I have him walking. Maybe Packers fans would really like to have him back. I think you can get by without him. And I think Edgerrin Cooper is just so elite, and he's going to command a huge payday in the next couple years. I think a team's going to pay Quay Walker a lot of money, and I think you kind of just let them, right? I think he's replaceable, and I think the team that signs him, I think in a couple years down the road, I think we're going to look at that contract and be like, ooh, is Quay Walker really worth that money? And I think for the Packers, it makes sense to just let him walk, right? So we have a couple guys here, nothing crazy, coming back. But I do have some moves for external free agency that I think Packers fans are going to like. So let's take a look at those. So looking at external free agency here, couple big moves. The first one, obviously, is bringing in Super Bowl champion pass rusher Boye Mafe from the Seattle Seahawks. Boye Mafe, again, I think this is a 3-year, $48 million deal. Obviously, it's a significant amount of money, but I really do think he could be worth it, right? He graded out really well this year. In a, not, I don't want to say a limited role. He played, almost 600 snaps, but he just wasn't that premier pass rusher for Seattle. They have just so many guys in that room. You have Uchenna Nwosu, and you have DeMarcus Lawrence, and you have those interior guys. And I just think that, he didn't get a chance to really shine this year under Mike Macdonald. I think he definitely could, opposite of Micah Parsons, right? I think you bring in a guy that's just this athletic and this well-rounded as a defensive end. I think he's younger than Rashawn Gary, that is, who we just traded. I think he has a chance to be everything Packers fans hoped Rashawn Gary was going to be, but for even less, right? This is a relatively manageable deal, and I think, at the end of this contract, I think there's a very good chance that, NFL fans as a whole, and Packers fans especially, look at this deal and say, wow, we kind of got a steal there. So Boye Mafe is a guy I would really, really like if the Packers brought in. I think Seattle might just get priced out of him. I don't think they're going to be willing to pay him what the Packers will be able to pay him. The next guy, kind of a reunion here, is Rasul Douglas. I think bringing him in as a possible CB2 would be awesome, right? Again, if you know anything about me, I love Rasul Douglas. I thought he was the Packers. I went, and you can ask people, right? I was kind of on the hill that I thought Rasul Douglas at points when he was on the Packers was better than Jair Alexander, just because of his consistency, his health. I thought he was a potential CB1. Obviously, he ends up getting traded to Buffalo. He plays for Miami last year. He's kind of been around the block since then, but he's a really good player, man. He's a really well-rounded player. He's familiar with Green Bay as an organization. I think bringing him back, obviously, he's a couple years older. I think bringing him back on just a 1-year deal to be a steady presence in that DB room, I think makes all the sense in the world. I would love, if I were a Packer fan, again, I don't love it as a Bears fan, but as a Packer fan, I would love a possible reunion with a guy like Douglas, just to bring, again, that stability. I have Brian Robinson here, the running back coming over from San Fran. Obviously, he played for the Commanders for a few years prior, gets traded to San Fran. They obviously have Christian McCaffrey. You're not going to get many snaps when you're playing behind a healthy Christian McCaffrey. He was the best running back in the NFL this year. But I do think that with, everybody but Marshawn Lloyd and Josh Jacobs leaving, right? You bring in a guy, especially if Josh Jacobs, if this is going to be the new Josh Jacobs where he just can't stay quite healthy, you cannot rely on Marshawn Lloyd. I know I'm not telling Packers fans anything new there. He's been nothing but hurt since he got drafted. I think bringing in Brian Robinson, a guy who can consistently get downhill, makes a lot of sense. I think he's kind of like that. I don't want to disrespect him and say like Walmart Josh Jacobs, but like he's kind of just that step down from Josh Jacobs, right? He's a similar mold. a guy that can, break tackles, get extra yards. I think he'd be a really good rotational option. And then lastly, Jermaine Pratt, that veteran linebacker, longtime Cincinnati Bengal. He follows his former defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, to the Colts this year. I think on a 1 year, $2.5 million deal, a guy that can, for now, replace Quay Walker. I think you still are looking for that long-term replacement. But I think Jermaine Pratt's good enough for this year as a veteran, as a steady presence in that linebacker room to kind of play that role and help bring along whatever young guys you bring with him. So yeah, I mean, I think, here you're making 3 big defensive moves in general in free agency, and then you add in a rotational guy like Brian Robinson, and you still have $16 million worth of cap space to play with. Obviously, some of that will be going towards your, 2026 NFL draft picks. But you're not breaking the bank here, and I think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, right? You're getting some guys that I think down the road could be seen as values. So before we hop into a mock draft for this year, let's just do a quick review of the depth chart for both the offense and the defense. So starting with the offense, really not much changes, right? You have really everybody the same here. Obviously, you lose a guy like Rasheed Walker at left tackle. You lose Romeo Doubs in that wide receiver room. We're bringing in Brian Robinson, you can see there in the blue, to be kind of that rotational back. And then otherwise, you're looking at pretty much the same thing, right? Pretty much the same exact lineup you rolled out last year. I thought the offensive points was really, really good. I think it has potential to be even better. As long as Tucker Kraft is healthy, I think he's really the X factor there, right? Is the Packers offense going to be good or is it going to be great? I think that depends on Tucker Kraft. He's the best player on the offense, in my opinion. I think he showed that prior to his injury this year. He is absolutely a top 5 tight end in the NFL. So we'll see if he can come back and replicate that. The only spots I'm a little bit concerned about, left tackle, Jordan Morgan, again, you drafted him to hopefully be a key piece in the offensive line. Up to until this point, he's been kind of a rotational guy. This is kind of his step, man. Like, put up or shut up at this point. You were a first-round pick. You played tackle in college. Let's see what you can do. Again, I don't know how Packers fans feel about that. I know it's a little scary. We can look at possible options in the draft as like insurance. And then center Sean Ryan, again, just a guy who isn't really a stellar pass protector. He is a mauler in the run game. I think Packers fans like him. Again, I'd have to get a vibe on that from you guys. And then I don't have it highlighted. Anthony Belton was a rookie last year. He's a huge human being who just made the transition to guard starting last year. He was a tackle in college. He didn't play, particularly amazing last year, but I think as a rookie, I think you feel, at least okay about his possible projection moving forward. I think him being there at right guard is just fine. So we're looking at, maybe some possible tackle options in the draft. But other than that, I think the offense looks pretty good. So now taking a look at the defense, here's where we have, a couple more of those changes. You add a guy like Boye Mafe across from Micah Parsons. I think that's a very formidable edge duo. I think between, them here in Green Bay and then, I obviously had Max, let me not spoil it too much, but I had Max Crosby going to Chicago in that rebuild. I think you just have such a strong division of pass rushers, right? You have Aiden Hutchinson in Detroit. You have guys like Jonathan Grenard in Minnesota. I think the Packers really, follow suit here with a guy like Boye Mafe. Obviously, you have, Devontae Wyatt, who struggled with injuries a bit this year. I still think is a very good player. You have Kobe Wooden, who's played well at points. I don't know if he's like traditional, like run stopping, mauling defensive tackle that you might need. So that could be a place we look to upgrade in the draft. But you still have guys like Nazir Stackhouse and Carl Brooks who have at points played some very meaningful snaps for Green Bay. So I think you feel at least okay about that front. At linebacker, Edgerrin Cooper, who's one of the best linebackers in the NFL. He's incredible. He's a guy that I wish the Bears had, right? I love Edgerrin Cooper. Jermaine Pratt slides in as that starting like middle linebacker. Again, we talked about him, a reliable veteran, at least for this year. And then you have Isaiah McDuffie and Tyrone Hopper kind of sliding in at that Sam spot, that strong side linebacker spot. I have that highlighted. I think it just kind of depends on how do you feel about Tyrone Hopper, right? He obviously didn't play too much last year, but I think in the preseason last year, which I know it's the preseason, right? I think he looked good, man. I thought he looked really, really good. I think he has the potential to be a starting linebacker, so we'll kind of see how he develops, especially over this summer. As far as cornerback goes, this is the spot I think Packers fans will be most concerned about. Since the prime of Jair Alexander, I think Packers fans have been waiting for that shutdown corner. I don't know if that shutdown corner is in the room with us right now, right? You have guys like Trayvon Diggs, Rasul Douglas, and Javon Bullard. slated to start here. Trayvon Diggs, it really just depends. Can he get back to form? We'll see. Rasul Douglas, I just love Rasul Douglas, man. I think he's going to be solid. I know I keep harping on that. I just really, really like him as a potential CB2, CB maybe 1 for this year. We'll see. You still have Carrington Valentine, a guy who's played a whole lot there as rotational option. You have Nate Hobbs, who you brought in last offseason, who I think, again, let me know, I thought was a bit underwhelming this year for what his expectations were and what his contract might have suggested. But he's still on the team, right? Javon Bullard's a very, very good nickel. We have no worries about him. And then that safety room is rock solid, right? You have Xavier McKinney, who's one of the best ball hawks in the NFL. You have Edwin Williams, who missed a couple games this year, but is just really good all around. I think he has been a huge surprise for Green Bay, at least considering where he got drafted. So I think, transitioning into the mock draft, I think we're looking at, possible corner. And remember, right, the Packers don't have their first round pick this year. Obviously, that's with Dallas after that Micah Parsons trade. So we're going to have to be a little bit savvy as far as can we find guys that can be day one contributors, in my opinion, especially on defense and more specifically in that cornerback room. So let's see what we can do in the 2026 NFL draft. So we got the Packers selected here. We're going to do a 4-round mock draft just like we did with the Chicago Bears. As you can see, the Packers aren't picking until that 52 spot in the second round. Again, that's due to that Micah Parsons trade. But let's just jump right into it and see what we can do to hopefully improve this team moving forward. So we'll sim here. Ooh, okay. So there's already a couple options I'm seeing just in this best available slot that I really like. Number one being this top dude here, Jake Golday. I'm not sure how much you guys know about him. He is an awesome player. He's a big dude. He fits that kind of, typical size threshold the Packers seem to have for really all of their defenders. It seems like they've always been a team that really looks for those measurables, and Jake Golday obviously fits it. He's 6'4", 240 pounds. He's played a lot of football. For Cincinnati, you can see his games played here, 12, 12, and 11 over the past 3 years. He's graded out very well. Obviously, an absolutely elite run defense grade this past year. I think possibly putting him next to a guy like Edgerrin Cooper could be huge. On the other side of the coin, I love D'Angelo Pons. I'm of the opinion that if looking at his size, right, he's 5'9", listed 173. That is incredibly small for an NFL corner. I think if D'Angelo Pons was even 5'11" and 195 pounds, he'd be a top 15 pick. D'Angelo Pons is unbelievable, right? He's uber competitive at the catch point. He has made plays on the ball. He always lines up with the team's number one receiver. He plays for the national champion this year. And look at that. His best game of the season, as far as PFF grades go, is in the national championship against Miami, right? And they have, 3 NFL caliber players in their receiver room, right? And he just absolutely locks them down. Unfortunately, I don't think he'll be a Packers kind of guy. Again, going back to that conversation we had earlier, it just seems like he just will not fit that size threshold that the Packers always look for. But I think just because of how much I love him, I'll at least consider him here. And then you have, as far as tackles go, Caleb Tiernan, a guy I briefly touched on last episode, seems to be maybe going to profile the guard. He has the prototypical tackle size as far as height and weight goes. His arms might be a little bit short, but he did play pretty well in pass pro this year, so he could be a possible option. It seems like, again, Green Bay really likes to find those kind of gems at offensive line. They don't typically draft them. Obviously, Jordan Morgan's an exception there. They don't always draft them super high. They seem to find them in the later rounds and then trust their development process. As much as I would love to go with D'Angelo Pons because I'm such a huge fan of him, I think I will go with Jake Golday, a guy that's going to be an immediate starter next to Edgerrin Cooper. Again, just fits that size threshold. I think he's going to test very, very well. He was on Feldman's Freaks list, if you're not familiar. Feldman kind of ranks some of the best athletes in college and provides some of their numbers. I think he is going to kind of blow people away at the combine, which the Packers seem to like a lot. So we're going to start with him at linebacker here. Moving on to the third round, we're at pick 84 here. Kind of looking at the same things, right? Looking at corner. I think Will Lee, I know he's listed, here on PFF as, ranking 108 in the draft. I would have no problem taking him kind of here in the middle of the third round. He is definitely more of a man-to-man corner than he is a zone corner, which I think is fine for Green Bay. He has that, prototypical size, 6'1", 190 pounds. He's played a lot of football in the SEC, which is always a good thing. The Packers love their SEC guys, especially on defense. I think is his nickname the Blanket? I know he has a fun nickname. He has that swagger to him that it seems like the Packers have been kind of missing. I know Keyshawn Nixon tries to be that guy. I don't know if he really can play that role just because, again, I don't think he's particularly great. I think Will Lee could at least potentially be, that CB2 type of player. I don't know if he'll ever be like lockdown CB1, but I think he'd be a good option. Looking at tackles again, Markel Bell is huge. He's 6'9", 300, probably 50 pounds. If you look at him, I wouldn't be surprised if he's heavier than 345. I don't know if the Packers would love that. They already drafted Anthony Belton, a guy that was, similarly giant, moved him into guard just because of some of the maybe movement concerns. Maybe Markel Bell has some of those same concerns. So I don't know if I'm looking at tackle here. Possible defensive line, Darrell Jackson Jr., a guy I really liked for Chicago in the last video. I think could make some sense. I think Tim Keenan can make a lot of sense, a guy who's a true run stopper at defensive tackle. But just kind of looking at how the board broke, I think I will go with Will Lee. I think he fits a lot of what Green Bay tries to do on defense, kind of that size, man coverage combo. And we talked about cornerback as a need. I think he kind of helps fill that. So we're going to take him there at 84, moving into the fourth round with our third pick and final pick of this mock. One guy I immediately look at is Austin Barber, the left tackle from Florida. He was a guy that I think a lot of people thought very highly of going into the year. As you can see, he kind of has this stretch in the middle of the season where he struggled a bit, but you look at teams like Miami and A&M, and I know this kind of scares teams because these are the three teams between Miami, Texas, and A&M that have the best pass rushers. Miami with Bain and Mesidor, and then Cassius Howell at A&M, and then Texas has Colin Simmons, who can't come out this year, but he struggled his most against NFL level competition, which is a little bit scary. But then he also played some great games against Tennessee, Florida State, Georgia. He seemed to play pretty well against. So I think he could be an option as a possible left tackle, right? He has a prototypical size, 6'6", 315 pounds. He's played left tackle, a very significant amount for the past 3 years for the Gators. I think we definitely consider him here. He has some developing to do, but I think Green Bay fans and myself would trust Green Bay to kind of develop him into a starting left tackle. Tight end, I don't think we're really looking at just because of how good Tucker Kraft is. Again, he just needs to be healthy. Another position, again, we can look at D tackle again. Chris McClellan, he's graded out really well and he has good size. In all honesty, I haven't watched him at all yet, so I don't really know too much about him. Obviously, he's been a key contributor for a good team in the SEC over the past 3 years, so just based on that, you can trust that he's probably at least decent, right? I just don't know enough about him to say, let's pick him at 120, right? So maybe he's an option. I'm not going to do that here. I think after looking at our options, I am going to go with Austin Barber. Possible left tackle option there. If Jordan Morgan is less than stellar, maybe Jordan Morgan kicks back inside to guard. Austin Barber can be that left tackle. At the very worst, he gives you flexibility to at least choose, right? He can help you get your best five out there. I think that's very valuable. Again, PFF doesn't love it. I'm not super concerned with their rankings. I'm looking more at, how do I see these guys and how do they fit in, scheme-wise with the teams we're looking at. Here for Green Bay, again, love Jake Golday. I think he's an immediate starter, an immediate impact player. Will Lee will get some burn. He might not be your number one guy right away, but I think, as a rotational possible CB2 option, I think that's really good. And then Austin Barber, like I just said, helps you get your best five out there. And can maybe be that Rasheed Walker replacement. Overall, again, we talked about it in the beginning of the video. I think the Packers are still well within a Super Bowl window. They have a Super Bowl caliber roster. I think with Micah Parsons back healthy and Tucker Kraft back healthy, I think they're going to be right back to where they were. Hopefully fighting for the division, fighting for the NFC, fighting for the Super Bowl. So yeah, especially with an episode like this where I'm talking about a team that, isn't my favorite. I'd like to think that I know enough to be, at least honest and open about what I think, but I would love to hear from you guys, right? What did I do right? Am I seeing these guys correctly? How do you feel about the draft? What kind of, roster moves would you guys make? So please, please, please let me know in the comments or hit me up on any of my social media. I'd love to talk to you guys about it. Otherwise, it's going to do it for me. Look out for it, some more episodes just like this. I think my next episode is going to be for the Seattle Seahawks, which I know seems weird. They just won the Super Bowl, but I think with just how much money and how many free agents they have, it could be a very fun episode, making a team like that even better. So we'll see how that goes. Look out for that. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you later.